Now to an NBC News exclusive, a new tape from Omarosa Manigault Newman, the former White House aide who wrote that tell-all about the Trump White House. Omarosa was on the show just a few moments ago. She says that this new tape is of a conversation between President Trump and his communications team from October 2017. We should note that at the end of the recording, you are going to hear a conversation cut off, a brief discussion of Hillary Clinton. That part was included in a tape that was released earlier today. What are we going to hear in this particular section?
This recording is kind of disturbing because it's right after the attacks in Niger. And you'll hear Donald Trump kind of rambling on about the attacks there, giving misinformation to the comms team and kind of mocking the death of these soldiers. It's painful to hear him because, as you know, he will go on to attack the widow of Sergeant David Johnson just a couple of weeks after this.
Everyone in the room here, comms team or national security folks in the room?
All comms team. These are all comms team.
Did everyone in the room have clearance?
No, these are junior staffers that he's rambling on to. Very junior staffers. And
he just rolled, just kind of bogarted into the room and
comes in, and then after he finishes, he makes us all go into the Oval Office to keep an audience for him to ramble on some more.
All right, we'll play the tape and then we'll talk about it on the other side. We also have our Pentagon correspondent standing by as well. Here's the tape.
We had 3.2 last quarter for this, so it's really going good. And we have a lot of things happening on the economic front. I think the military is doing good. And now on Niger. So what happens is we have decimated it's a rough business. They're rough too. They want to kill us. We've let the military do what they have to do. And whether you call it rules of engagement or any way you want to say it, but we've let them do. And in the Middle East, there's very few left. We've done a very good job. We've done more in 7 months, because really it's 7 months that we started. We've done more in 7 months than they've done in 8 years. Okay, and so they're good there. But what happens is now they flee, and they flee to Africa, and they flee to Niger and countries around there. And that's how these young people get attacked, and they got attacked by 50 real fighters. But these were people, in many cases, that were in the Middle East that now go to Africa to try and, cause problems there. And ultimately, they want to come back here because this is where they really want to be. So it's a rough business. I don't think I'd want to be a terrorist, right? It's not a good life, but it's the only thing that. What else is there? But that is, people don't say that. The reason they're there is because we forced them out, and there's not nearly as many. It's not nearly as intense, but it's pretty intense, and you see that happening. So that's that. I think Hillary's getting killed now with Russia. The real Russia story is Hillary and collusion. Somebody told.
All right, so the laughter that we heard there, Omarosa, they were laughing at what part there?
They were laughing because he's like making light of the situation. And he's saying, well, I wouldn't want to be terrorist. And then you hear the laughter, and he continues on to talk about, I don't want to be in that business. And you see the transcript, but it's not a laughing matter. We lost 4 American soldiers and 4 of our allies, the Nigerian troops that were fighting alongside. And they were ambushed by 100 ISIS fighters. And it's unfortunate because he would go on to attack the widow of this soldier. So you have to question how seriously he takes the people who put their lives on the line for this country, the sacrifices made by American families. You hear these conversations, and in the op-ed, the anonymous writer talks about people being very concerned. When people say, come forward and give us proof that he's unfit, give us proof that he's unhinged, here it is, Donald Trump, raw, showing you just how unhinged and inappropriate he is, talking to junior staffers about something so serious.
And again, there's that hard turn at the end from talking about the fight against terrorism in Niger, and then in the next breath, Hillary Clinton.
His go-to is Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. That's his greatest hit. He's
not just on Twitter, not just in speeches, but
in person. in meetings with his staff, and then he wants us to go out and report this garbage that he repeats, and that's why people questioned our credibility every single day.
I want to bring in NBC News Pentagon correspondent Hans Nichols now to give us some context to this recording. And for our viewers and listeners, we should be clear. We played this for you a few moments ago. You've had some time to digest it. You weren't just listening to it as we were listening to it. Give us some context here if you can, sir.
Well, a lot of what the president was talking about was well known at the time. The idea that these American troops, this special forces team, was overwhelmed by about 50 troops. We knew that number there. The main new thing I heard from President Trump is the idea that the ISIS fighters, and it was an ISIS-linked group in Niger, that they had come from the Middle East. That's the first time I've heard any official say it that definitively. And Craig, I've got to be honest, we've asked a lot around here, what's happening to all the ISIS fighters that are in Syria, that are in Iraq? They have not seen hard evidence that they have physically moved from the Middle East to Africa. So the president either is revealing something quite new there, or he's saying something that actually isn't true. I don't have the raw intel, so I'm not in a position to adjudicate. One other thing on presidents declassifying stuff, this has been a long-standing debate. The general rule seems to be that the president can declassify something just by saying it. He has the power himself. The most glaring example we saw of that was when he spoke to the Russian foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, inside the Oval Office, talking about some very data-sensitive intelligence that they collected from allies. At the time, it was collected from the Israelis, but they didn't want to necessarily reveal that. So there's a lot in there. To me, the newest point, whether or not it's true, I don't know, is that these fighters from Niger, in Niger came from the Middle East. I haven't heard a lot of evidence of that inside this building. Craig?
To be clear, we should point out here that we have reached out to the White House to comment on the tape that we just heard. We have not heard back from the White House on that request.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.